Imagine this moment, December 25, 1991. The red hammer-and-sickle flag is lowered over the Kremlin for the last time. A symbol of an empire's end, a moment that redrew the map of the world. But what if it never happened? What if the Berlin Wall never fell? What if the Soviet Union survived? How would our world, your world, be different today? The most immediate and earth-shattering difference would be the continuation of the Cold War. Forget the relative peace of the 90s. We'd be living in a world permanently locked in a bipolar struggle between two superpowers, the United States and a persistent Soviet Union. This isn't just a political footnote. It would change everything. Military spending on both sides would remain at astronomical levels. Trillions of dollars, rubles, and pounds that in our timeline went into developing the internet, consumer goods, and healthcare would instead be poured into new tanks, new jets, and new weapons systems, all in the name of deterrence. The alliances that defined the 20th century would remain frozen in place. NATO wouldn't be questioning its purpose. It would be a heavily armed, aggressive shield, its primary function still to hold the line against Soviet expansion in Europe. The map of Europe itself would look drastically different. Germany would almost certainly remain a nation divided, a stark symbol of the ideological chasm. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, these nations would never join the European Union or NATO. They would remain firmly under Moscow's sphere of influence, their dreams of sovereignty crushed under the weight of the Warsaw Pact. The global stage would be a constant diplomatic battleground. At the United Nations Security Council, the Soviet Union would continue to wield its veto power, likely blocking many US-led initiatives and creating a state of perpetual gridlock. Think of the international stalemates of the 70s and 80s, but on a loop, forever. This enduring, powerful communist state would also serve as a beacon for other authoritarian regimes. The global wave of democratization that we saw in the late 20th century might have been just a ripple, with authoritarianism maintaining a much stronger foothold worldwide. But the rivalry wouldn't just be on Earth. The intense competition would have kept the space race and the arms race burning white-hot. Driven by military necessity and national pride, we might have seen incredible leaps in certain areas. Imagine a permanent Soviet moon base by the year 2000, or a US one right next to it. We might have hypersonic missile technology far beyond what we have today. The focus of innovation would be laser-sharp, military, and state-controlled tech. Surveillance, cryptography, rocketry, these would be the prized jewels of technological advancement. However, there's a flip side to that coin. While state-sponsored tech soared, consumer technology would be left in the dust. The Soviet command economy was notoriously terrible at innovating for the average person, the personal computer revolution. It might have been delayed by a decade, or even longer. Your sleek smartphone, it probably wouldn't exist. In the Soviet bloc, the idea of a privately owned supercomputer in your pocket would be pure science fiction. And the internet, as we know it, this open, global network would be impossible. At best, we'd have a fractured splinternet. The West would have its network, and the Soviet Union would have its own closed, heavily censored, and monitored version. Imagine a digital iron curtain, where information from the outside world is treated as a dangerous contagion. Scientific progress would suffer, too. In the Soviet sphere, scientists would continue to face immense political pressure. Fields like genetics or free market economics, deemed ideologically impure, would be stifled, holding back human knowledge for political reasons. For the hundreds of millions living inside this surviving USSR, daily life would be a continuation of the old struggles. State control over every facet of life, from what you could buy to what you could say. The infamous lines for basic goods would still be a feature of city life. The vibrant consumer choice we take for granted would be a fantasy. Culture would be policed. Artists, writers, and musicians would have to conform to the rigid doctrine of socialist realism, or risk their careers and their freedom. Underground dissident art would exist, but it would be a dangerous and marginalized world. That profound cultural divide between East and West would never have healed. Human rights would be the greatest casualty. The Iron Curtain would remain a very real, very guarded border. The freedom to travel, to leave one's own country, would not be a right, but a rare and suspicious privilege. Inside, there would be no free press, no multi-party elections, no open dissent. The ever-watchful eye of the KGB would ensure that ideological conformity was maintained through surveillance and suppression. It would be a society deliberately isolated from the world, its people shielded from the torrent of information and cultural change happening elsewhere. On a global scale, the very idea of capitalism's triumph would be laughable. The socialist-communist model would persist as a major, viable alternative. This wouldn't just be an academic debate, it would profoundly influence politics in the West, with socialist parties potentially holding far more power and influence than they do in our timeline. This alternate world might have avoided some of our timeline's conflicts. Without the power vacuum left by the Soviet collapse, the brutal breakup of Yugoslavia might not have happened in the same way. Moscow's iron fist would have kept a lid on simmering ethnic tensions in Central Asia and the Caucasus. In the Middle East, unwavering Soviet support for regimes in Syria and Iraq would have dramatically altered the dynamics of the Gulf Wars and the balance of power in the region. But this stability comes at an unimaginable cost. The Soviet system was an environmental disaster. A surviving, industrializing USSR would likely be a far greater polluter, complicating any global efforts to tackle climate change. And what about terrorism? The threat might be different. Without the Soviet-Afghan War's endgame and the subsequent destabilization, perhaps the rise of Al-Qaeda would never have happened. The world's security focus might have remained fixed on the superpower rivalry, rather than shifting to non-state actors. So, what does this world look like? It's a world of deep, permanent division. A world with moon bases, but no iPhones. A world with a simple geopolitical map, just two colors, red and blue, but a far more oppressed and less free global population. It's a world that trades personal liberty, cultural diversity, and economic dynamism for ideological purity and the cold, terrifying stability of a perpetual standoff. But could it have even lasted? Would the creaking Soviet economy have inevitably collapsed under its own weight, regardless of political reforms? Or was a final, cataclysmic confrontation between the two superpowers simply inevitable? What would you have given up in your own life if the Soviet Union had survived? What do you think would be the biggest difference in this alternate world? Would you be using a clunky, Soviet-made computer right now to watch a state-approved video? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into What If, please like this video, subscribe for more alternate history, and share this with a friend who loves to think about the past.